Hey, what is up everyone? Today we're going to talk about alternative funerals, mainly the resurgence of home funerals. A lot of people think that talking about funerals is dark and depressing, but really it's about love and creating a ceremony that truly honors your loved one. I'm Risa Morimoto, your host, and you're watching Modern Aging, where we chat about innovative and holistic ways to care for one another as we age. If you click on that little button below that says subscribe on it and the little bell, you'll be sure to be notified whenever new episodes are uploaded. And you can also sign up onto our email list at thisismodernaging.com. So my mother passed away recently. She fought a 19-year battle with Parkinson's, a stroke, and cancer. We did some videos on our journey about hospice and end of life, and those links are above somewhere. Amy Cunningham from Fitting Tribute Funeral Services in Brooklyn was our funeral director, and she gently walked us through every single step. The reality is that only 10% of us will die suddenly. That means that 90% of us will actually have time to think and plan for a funeral. There are many alternatives out there, but many of us just don't know what they are. So if you're curious about more personal, eco-friendly options, watch our chat. Today we're going to talk about home funerals, green burials, something that's kind of very personal because of our experience working together with my mom's funeral. And this is harder.
I know. Your mom's funeral was a funeral I that was so beautiful, and the way your family engaged in the whole experience was remarkable. It was an honor to serve your family. It really was. And I don't say that lightly.
No, I mean, it was, under the circumstances, it was the most beautiful thing. I mean, thanks to your guidance, you really walked us through. I think, before I even knew you, I didn't even know it was an option. We were able to watch my mom pass in the home. Mm-hmm. And, you gave us the instructions. I mean, maybe you can walk through in terms of what is a home funeral, actually, and...
Well, more and more Americans are wanting an experience that moves at a slower pace. And this works especially well when hospice is supervising the death. So death is expected. Often it's a cancer that is causing this life to come to a close, and hospice comes in, supervises the medication, and in your case, and in many other cases, the death occurs in the home so that the deceased can be in his or her own bed, and that you guys can sleep on the floor or in your own bedrooms, and that's really, as I feel, as good as it gets. I'm careful, though, not to emphasize the importance of dying at home, because for some families, they really want the support of a hospital setting, and home death is overwhelmingly painful, and you lose so much sleep, and it's not for everyone. But in your case, it worked awfully well and set us up to have what could be called a delayed transfer or a home funeral, because we kept your mom in place for 3 days. And
At home.
With
and the dry ice, which who knew?
Right. Dry ice. In the old days, when ice was available, that's what you would bring into a home to keep a deceased person's body from rapidly decomposing. So ice, just as we refrigerate any kind of protein in the home when we cook, I don't know if that's a very apt analogy, you might want to cut that, but ice is very useful to protect the body and keep it in good, pristine shape. It's amazingly effective. So
and it was October, so we were able to just open up all the windows, keep her bedroom cool, and we kept her in her room, actually.
Yep.
And I have to say, it was really valuable. Now, in retrospect, I can't imagine having her wheeled away as soon as she died.
Yes.
And you told us that would be the case, where we would be able to sit with her overnight, and that,
Yes.
and all day the next day, and all day the following day, and just being able to spend time with the body would create a sense of closure.
Yep. Yep.
Which it definitely did.
Yep. It's my belief that the American public is most disenchanted with the funeral service they receive right at the get-go, at the transfer of the body from the place of death. A lot of people have been taking beautiful care of the dying person, and then when death arrives, it's always astonishing even when you're waiting for it. But to lurch for the phone, call a funeral firm to come cart that deceased person away is something we try to teach folks when it's possible, that you can sort of just experience the moment. It's a very rare thing, right? To be in the presence of someone you love who is no longer alive. So these moments are called liminal experiences between death and the ultimate burial or cremation. This is sacred time, you know, even for the secular, this is special time. And to not rush those moments. So even when someone is not remotely interested in a home funeral or an extended day layout in the house, when someone calls and says, it's happened, mom is dead, I say, well, when do you want me to come? Not, I'll be right over. Because I think even then, at least 2 or 3 hours can be very beneficial to acclimate to the new reality.
So you're saying that funeral directors will just come as soon as
Well,
possible?
here in New York, a funeral director usually takes about an hour and a half to arrive at most hospitals and transfer the deceased person out of the room they died in, sometimes in the presence of family. You know, everybody's different also. It's interesting to me. I've come to know people and watch them have different reactions. Some people have been at the bedside as the person was suffering, and death was so long in coming that the family members are absolutely exhausted and can hardly wait to get. And it's not because they didn't love the person, they just need to leave. I've seen husbands almost angry at the body of a deceased wife because they feel like she's not there anymore. I'm so mad about this whole circumstance. I'm just going to go home. So I honor that reaction as well as the desire to sit, have a cup of tea, light a candle, you know, put on music. Now that we have our iPhones, we have music in our palms, and we can put on something soothing and just sit and hold hands, tell stories, and be together. So that can happen at, most hospitals will give families 3 hours in the room after a death.
Oh, well, that's good.
Emergency rooms are a little different. That's more complex, and they may ask you to go. And then you need a funeral home or a place to retreat to in the coming days to have a viewing and an experience. But when death occurs at a home, the way your mom's did, and a family is wanting to move slowly, and just feel the feelings that arise, you know. Sometimes it's layers of experience. And this is the old-fashioned way that men and women used to honor the dead.
So this is not revolutionary. This is just going back to the way.
Yes, this is an old-fashioned way of, in Ireland, the Irish wake was a custom when after a death, the family would sit up all night and also invite neighbors in to view the dead person. Sometimes people played music. Sometimes folks played cards, and at a card
like a
table.
party.
Yeah, children were playing with toys on the floor. Clergy might be called in for a visit or a prayer, but it was a vigil that lasted all night because it was believed that the soul of the dead person was disoriented and needed time to get acquainted with what death was like. And that the family members, too, needed this hour or these hours to just sit and, I want to say, marinate in the experience, just honor the dead person and tell stories about their life and be together at a time that was very painful. And it was believed that this would soften the blow of the severing between life and death. So
it was strangely comforting just to hang out with her body.
right, and be sleeping in the house.
Yeah.
I am myself, not having had an experience in my own family with this kind of ritual. I would be fascinated with the sort of cycles of the day and napping and then going down and viewing the body, then maybe going to cook and having a meal, then going back to the body, having conversations, sometimes laughing, then crying. So grief is amazing, and we need to expose ourselves to all of the emotions involved in it. So a home funeral can really give permission to more people to have the time they need.
Yeah. And there's just such a, you're just in your home, so there's just a comfort that won't ever exist anywhere else. So
And you guys were cooking, and
yeah, we had so many people coming in and out of the house and saying hi to her,
right. So neighbors came in and friends you called?
Oh yeah, it was endless stream of people coming in and out, and that was amazing too. I also wanted to talk to you or ask you about embalming, because we in fact did not have to embalm, and I thought that was actually required, and that was a discovery.
Oh, that's a good discovery to make, because embalming is never required by law. In each of the 50 states, embalming is never required by law.
So why
it's
do
a
people
funeral.
do it?
It's a funeral home custom, and it's a belief still advanced within certain communities that feel they want a preserved body in pristine shape. I struggled when I entered the funeral industry to understand it, and it is necessary. I mean, not everyone dies as beautifully as your mother did. There are people who've had traumatic motorcycle accidents and whose bodies are in terrible, terrible shape, and some folks who've been lingering in a hospital, they're so thin, or they might have bed sores, so not every situation is optimal and works as well for a home funeral. Embalming is the process of bleeding the deceased person out, removing the blood from the body and filling it with a chemical that is alcohol and formaldehyde that binds the proteins of the soft tissue on the bone. This may be more information than you want to know.
No, it's amazing that you can do that to
when
a
you're
human body.
Yes, when you're in mortuary school, you study all this, and when you get to the moment of your chemistry curriculum where formaldehyde is really explained, it's quite magnificent. And that's why when you behold a deceased person in an open casket that's been embalmed, the person's been embalmed, they look quite plump and pink, and if the embalmer is good, they look quite themselves, as they did in life. I mean, it doesn't always work out so well.
I have to say, I don't think I've ever seen anybody look like themselves.
Really? When I got out of mortuary school, I was really opposed to embalming. And then I worked at a Roman Catholic Latino firm where a lot of embalming took place, and I softened my views. I don't think embalming is right for everybody, but I saw a lot of families come in and say, "Oh my God, she looks so beautiful. When we left her in the hospital, we were so distraught because she didn't look like herself. And where is the embalmer? We want to hug the embalmer."
Oh, wow.
So we would bring, the embalmer out, and some embalmers think of themselves as artists.
I bet,
And
yeah.
they do put people together again. So the natural body and the beauty of your own mother was, your mom's funeral was one of the most beautiful ones I've ever been able to help a family manage.
Oh, thank you.
It really, really was.
I thought I was prepared. And then when it happened, I realized that I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And having, she passed on a Sunday, and then we had the cremation, the funeral on the Wednesday, and we had kind of the wake at home on Tuesday. And just like you said, though, having those days where she was at home with us really helped. And I think that to be able to kind of go in and out you know, create these, you know, whether it was the prayer flags or whether it was the flowers or whether it was preparing the food or whatever it was. The fact that we were doing this all at home, at her home, that made all the difference, you know, for us as a family, because that's, you know, I was married at her home, you know, it's like we've, like we
Wow.
always did everything
This
at her
was
house.
the center of the
Yeah.
family.
You know, so I think that it was only appropriate, you
Yeah.
know, for our family that, you know, she had her funeral at home. But yeah, I mean, as difficult of a transition this is for the living, you
Yeah.
know, I think that to have someone like you guide us through that process was everything. I think that one of the important lessons that we learned as a family was the planning process and kind of preparing for that moment. Not everybody can plan, because of course there are unexpected deaths, but in our case, you know, Mom had been sick for a very long time and then she went into hospice, so we knew that it was imminent. As much as we were in denial about it too, I think,
Right.
in many ways. And I think we spoke maybe about a month prior to her death, right?
Yep, you gave me a call.
And you discussed basically what we should expect to happen in terms of her body, and so that emotionally and mentally we could just prepare for that. And in fact, it did happen, and that was everything to kind of know, you know.
I guided you a little bit in most people die with their mouths open, and part of a home funeral is to naturally close the mouth if you wish it to be closed. So we talked about rolling up a towel, putting it under her jaw, and to just bring that jaw up, or some people tie a scarf from here to here, and that for just a few hours until rigor mortis sets in. That's a good way to naturally make a person look like they're ready to be viewed by others you might call in.
Right. How do you recommend families prepare for an impending death in the family?
Well, one important thing that I recall you and I reviewing in advance was how much everything was going to cost. Because you don't want to be planning a funeral with Kleenex in your hand, making decisions about caskets and hearses and cremation versus burial when you're grieving. So I was very happy that you and I had pretty much solidified our arrangement and had a good working relationship a week before your mother actually died. And we were also in telephone contact and text messaging each other, because I remember you were going out of town and then I was going out of town and I wanted to be there for you. So miracle upon miracles, it all worked out, and I was right there on the other side of the phone when you did call. But also there are supplies you can gather. A really progressive family who's thinking a death out in advance might think, well, what are we going to dress Mom in? You know, will she be in her own clothes? Should we purchase a beautiful burial shroud? There are now burial shroud companies on the internet where you can buy gorgeous silk shrouds online, or you can go through a funeral director and get them, or you can just, in truth, find your way to as beautiful and as natural a large piece of fabric as works for you. I've even had people think out maybe a certain family quilt is something that they want to gently and lovingly wrap the deceased person in. So other folks are just adamant. They want their loved one in a particular suit or outfit or necktie, and some families I've worked with have placed things in pockets, like little, one time I'm thinking of a man who died and his young daughter had put a little tiny teddy bear in the pocket of his suit. So things like that you can do at the bedside prior, if you're not having a home funeral, you can dress the deceased prior to the funeral director's arrival and the removal. So increasingly, folks are opting for simple cremation.
What is that?
A simple cremation is a direct cremation without any sort of service. Then they might have an urn and take the urn to church later, or an urn to the memorial service. This is not my favorite kind of funeral, but you can kind of save it by at least having a moment at the bedside prior to everything.
Is that because of money, or is that just because you want to get it done?
That's a good question. I think money is a driving factor behind the move to simply and directly, without ceremony, cremate. Also, I think many secular people are actually confused and feel like if someone wasn't religious, they shouldn't have a funeral. I think we're all adjusting to a new secular world where ritual can prevail, but folks don't know what the ritual is going to be. So they're tempted to skip it. So sometimes I hear from families saying, hello, we're just going to cremate. He wasn't religious, so he didn't want us to make a fuss. But I feel sad for that family sometimes, and here I may sound like a funeral director because I do want them to do more, but I want them to have more of an experience than just that. Because again, death doesn't happen all the time, and these moments are not only about our own separation from the deceased, it's also about our relationship to death for the rest of our life. So I encourage folks to see these experiences and these moments in life as potentially transformative. You know, you learn a lot about your family members, about your core beliefs, your relationship to the divine. You know, we all struggle, and in the course of our lifetimes, we may change from being quite religious to not particularly, or just the other way around. So death, again, and that's why I got so interested in funerals, because I came to realize that, oh my God, everybody in the congregation or in the chapel at a service of any sort, religious or secular, has the opportunity to acquaint themselves with death and their own role in their own life, their own reason for living. I think a good funeral can send everybody out the door with a new life philosophy almost. And so going to funerals, even if they're the funerals of an office mate whose parent has died and you're invited, do go, because you'll learn something about them and about yourself and about life generally. So
that is absolutely true.
Yeah, these are more powerful than other rituals we routinely enjoy, like weddings or bar mitzvahs or 50th wedding anniversary or retirement parties. The funeral is its own ministry, I think.
So I guess we should just go back a little bit in terms of what one would expect if they're planning on having a home funeral, or if that's something that they want to do. We have a call, or they have a call with their funeral director of choice. And then you kind of have a checklist, right?
There's some states that don't require the involvement of a funeral director.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, you might not know that New York, where we had your mother's funeral, is one of the 8 most conservative states in the country, where a licensed funeral director is required to be involved in the planning and the management of that funeral, and they call it supervision. In states like New Hampshire, Colorado, a lot of states in the United States, the Funeral Consumers Alliance keeps a good list and directory of what the laws are in your particular state. But there are certainly some states where you can plan a home funeral with a home funeral guide. The National Home Funeral Alliance keeps a registry of who is skilled in your community with home funeral care, the bringing in of the dry ice, and even the filing of the death certificate. So still, in those states where families can file the death certificate themselves and get a transit permit, which allows them to then carry their loved one to the crematory or to the cemetery, some of those people in those states still opt to use a funeral director for at least that paperwork, which simplifies their life quite a bit.
Yeah,
And I
sure.
might advise that. Though there are plenty of women that I hang out with who insist that a family can do everything on their own and take a lot of pride in doing it on their own, including the driving. In Texas, it's my understanding that you can put grandma in your own pickup truck in her casket and take her to the cemetery yourself. Here in New York, we're not like that. It's a disappointment to some of us, but I can also understand, but it'll be a long time, and change is a long time in coming. The funeral industry can be more supportive of families who want to do as much as possible on their own. This is what we're hearing. Families are saying, I like to explain it this way. I think in their lovely masculinity, old-time funeral directors used to like to take all the work and all the grief off of people, and they thought that they were sparing them all that hardship. Let us do it. Come to our funeral parlor. We'll prepare her and bathe her and dress her for you and have everything done for you. Increasingly, baby boom families are saying, well, wait a minute, we would like to do more than that. And we are so bereft that somehow the doing makes us feel a bit better about ourselves. So even the tiniest request is now being heard at conventional funeral firms. A daughter might come in and say, can I put mom's lipstick on? Or can I fix her hair? Because you might not fix it right. So, but with home funeral families, such as your own, funeral directors are standing back a little bit and letting you guys do more, arranging your own flowers, putting all those beautiful things above the casket. I hope you have lovely photos as part of this piece to show all the beautiful work you did in that room.
So we had everybody write messages to Mom, and we had the flags that you gave us so people could write.
That was nice.
Yeah.
I was happy you liked the flags.
Those were awesome.
Those are on Etsy. You can buy blank Tibetan prayer flags on Etsy from various artists, or you can make your own and just hang those all over the casket.
It was awesome. And then we placed them all in the casket. We bought our casket online.
Yes, that's amazing.
Because of your suggestion.
Yes.
This guy in Canada. And it was perfect because it was simple, and it was made all with wood, no nails.
Very pretty casket.
So it was a green casket, which was great, and very simple,
Yeah.
very much like my mom, so it really kind of fit her.
Yep.
And then my brother put it together, which was weird but nice.
Really nice. But you had a wood shop too to build it.
We put it in the garage, and it was kind of funny because we had neighbors coming over, and they were like, "Oh my God, I want to do this for my dad, and I want to do this for and people getting excited, which was also pretty awesome, right?
Yeah.
We had a lot of laughs and a lot of people just being really inspired by just how much we participated.
That's how an experience like this reverberates. Your mom's death will help your friends experience their parents' deaths in a different way. So the growth extends itself in a very powerful manner. I like that.
No, it's amazing. It's really, in that sense, that's very much who my mom was, just kind of spreading the love, or,
Yeah.
just changing directions a little bit. But I wanted to ask you about green burials and the rise of this movement, and what you thought about it, and what does it really mean to have a green burial?
Not every, let's say from a home funeral, not every home funeral needs to lead to a cremation. It can also lead to an eco-friendly burial in a nearby cemetery that allows simple pine boxes and no embalming. Green burial furthers legitimate environmental aims, just helps to reduce the carbon footprint of the funeral. So there's no embalming, no metal nails in the casket. So the casket has to be either wood or at some environmentally friendly cemeteries today, you don't need a casket at all. You can bury a deceased person wrapped in fabric, surrounded by flowers, and presented on a kind of flat pallet or board, or a wicker kind of tray, if you can imagine. These are 6-foot long boards that support the body for the lowering into the grave.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so a green burial is as simple as the burials were in the United States 200 years ago prior to the Civil War, where you just are naturally returning the body to source material or the soil to let nature take its course, and the body will return to the soil. And this soft tissue on our bones is full of vitality and usefulness to the earth, even after death. So we don't think of it that way, but those
Although
molecules.
I imagine we're pretty toxic also.
Well, there are some people wondering really about, if someone's had a lot of chemo. Certainly, if anyone's had radiation pellets put into their body recently, prior to their death, that would be something that would have to be on a case-by-case basis. But generally speaking, the soil is incredibly cleansing and powerful and can reduce all those materials, and the body will decompose, and the bones will surrender to the soil over time. And green burial is a very powerful farewell with people gathered around an open grave. And then the shovels are provided so that first you might lower the body, put evergreen boughs on top of the body, and then slowly use a shovel to start to fill the grave. So this unites people with all humanity, and you feel a profound sense of unity with all human history. Mm-hmm. You get it a little bit at a crematory with the witnessed cremation and the farewell at the chamber when the casket is placed inside. That's also considered a committal service or a kind of graveside. But green burial is you're out in nature, you hear the birds, you're grieving and you're shoveling, and you really, I don't know how else to say it. As sad as people are about the death, after these green burials, they actually skip a little bit out of the cemetery. It's interesting to see. Wow. They're kind of elated by what they've done. And they might say something like, oh, Mom loved to garden. She would be so proud of us to have done it this way. Either method can be beautiful. Cremation is generally less expensive. Grave space in urban areas can be very expensive. Mm-hmm. And some communities believe in one or the other. For instance, the Jewish people have always believed in burial, simple burial, humility in the face of death, and honesty and sincerity, and burial is very important. Some Buddhists and certainly Hindus believe that cremation liberates the soul and is very purifying. So I never question people on their beliefs one way or another. I think green burial is a little bit more environmentally, is more environmentally friendly, but we're working to clean cremation up, and there are new techniques available in some states, not yet in New York. Alkaline hydrolysis and another remarkable method called recomposition are Wow. coming their way. And these are ways that bodies can be returned to the elements without all the gas and the fuel needed to heat a retort to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what a cremation is. Wow. It's the use of gas to heat a chamber to 1800 degrees for 2.5 hours. So the cremation has its critics, and we should look carefully in the decade to come. If the whole baby boom is going to cremate, that's a serious problem. We need to look at the emissions and the real cost of cremation to the environment.
So do you see a growth in this green burial movement, home funeral movement?
Absolutely. I think it's all about families wanting, like we discussed, authenticity, reality, and control. And both home funerals and green burials and witnessed cremations all have elements of that in them. There's no set right or wrong. I think progressives like me are trying to guide folks back to burial, but it's a big request in urban areas where you then might have to drive 2.5 hours north to an eco-friendly cemetery. So we're eager for new modalities to come and be available to funeral consumers. And a lot of women are coming into the business now, which is exciting. They're bringing a different kind of intelligence and approach to funerals generally, and encouraging families to take charge as much as they're comfortable. And I've seen families evolve from one death to the next. You know, you might be less ambitious with one and then do something more on the next one.
Right.
The first parent, then the second parent, and sometimes folks change it up. One parent might be cremated, one might be buried. People have different requests at the end, different eccentricities. Some people are terrified of and feel that burial is very claustrophobic, and rational or not, they don't want that for themselves.
Right.
So I've learned to be a good listener. Sometimes with the home funeral, not everyone in the family is in agreement. What I've seen is sometimes it's the daughter, a daughter who's read about home funerals will come in and say, this is what we're going to do for mom. And then the brother might say, this has happened twice for me, the brother will say, what are you talking about? Keeping mom's body in the house? That's insane. And then the funeral director, someone like me, comes in, and I have to give everyone a vote and everyone a voice. And I might work with that brother to explain why we do this, why it's not a crazy idea, and why it's... But still, he needs to be heard, and we need to put him at peace, because it's not... no one in the family should direct what's going to happen next, and everybody...
Well, so you're part psychologist also.
I do. I enjoy that part, actually. Yeah, it's good.
So if people want to find out more about home funerals, green burials, and the like, what do you recommend? Are there places they should go?
Yes, absolutely. There's some great websites, and the most important ones are the National Home Funeral Alliance for the home funeral. It has a directory for, home funeral friendly funeral directors, as well as home funeral guides and death doulas, who are all trained in the home funeral and the use of dry ice. Then the Green Burial Council has a list of every eco-friendly cemetery in the United States that has met a certain number of requirements that the association requests, and it's a great resource. Also, we'll link you to funeral directors who have announced that they're particularly interested in eco-friendly burial, and who stock the willow caskets, the pine boxes, the simple trays, and the shrouds that are all part of the beauty of green burial. The last group is the Funeral Consumers Alliance, and they are best acquainted with the laws of your particular state and the funeral homes that are most progressive and interested in working with families who want to do more than is considered traditional at this point in time. Something else you've said twice now, and I wanted to offer you some wisdom, that we've spoken of closure, and it's my understanding that bereavement experts now say that closure is something we should put out of our minds and not even aim for. It's not a goal, because there is no closure. The grief you hold for your mother will be with you for the rest of your life, right? That's hard to hear, but it's learning how to distribute that grief and carry it in a new way. So right now, you're a month away from her death, and as well as you're managing and as successful as the home funeral was, I'm confident that each of your family members, the three of you kids, are all sort of lopsided in one way or another as you move through these days. and you'll learn not to be as lopsided and redistribute the load as you move forward. So a home funeral or an experience that you've really integrated and kind of you move into the future in a empowered manner. You know, you did something so courageous and brave that now you're empowered to move forward, influence others. We're making this video, you know, folks will learn and benefit by what you guys did.